inviting a couple of experts to join the conversation. So we'll invite the three speakers that just presented to hang around for a little bit. We'll ask our panelists that are coming in to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. Looks like we've got some last minute changes here. So I might start with maybe if Mark Penver's there, if you could jump on in. I'm there. Good stuff. Do you want to just take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Sorry.
Sorry. So yeah, I'm Mark from Foresight Design. I'm the design director. We're based in Glasgow. We've worked on every kind of project you can possibly imagine, including electric vehicle charging units in technologies that haven't even been used on public vehicles yet, which is fun, to inclusive products like the Sop Spoon, which is currently at the V&A in Dundee, which is my preference, which is removing technology and actually looking for the simplest solution. People who try to solve this with technology basically had things that look like strap-on dildos for the hand, which is just a terrible idea, all the way through to something that is completely left field, which is humane lamb castration. It's a glorious world, but where I'm getting at with this is there had to be a lot of change in how farmers and users operated in sheep farming in order to make this product commercially viable. We had to do a lot of fighting governments to change policies in order to do that. And the biggest lesson that we learned was without an actual leader or a driver behind that kind of thing, it just doesn't happen. And I know how much it cost to get the legislation changed around drug supply. So yeah, there's a lot of lessons there that I could probably bring. And that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark. And I believe we have Clare Pennington, Principal Consultant at Urban Foresight.
Hello.
Who's going to do a quick introduction?
Yeah. So obviously Dan just said, my name's Clare Pennington. I'm Principal Consultant at Urban Foresight in the electric mobility team. And I've been leading on our accessibility and equity work for the past couple of years. Dan said I was free to ramble and be completely random in this. So if you've got 20 minutes now, just put your feet up and I'll get cracking. We began the projects that we've been working on pretty much from the standpoint of wanting to do something really practical that would make a tangible difference for disabled motorists now, and really kind of encourage more people to have the confidence to be able to switch to EV. We've done a lot of research, and obviously there's a wealth of research out there on accessibility, but at that point there weren't any sort of real solutions, and we were keen to change that. Our first project was with funding from Transport Scotland as part of the 2 phases of the Can Do project. And the focus for us was really on motorists with mobility disabilities. So challenges that are related to strength, balance, dexterity and reach. And after many trials and product iterations, we developed an automated cable reel that addresses a number of sort of key issues for people when charging an EV at an existing charge point. So the weight of the cable, the length of the cable trailing on the ground, the need to use 2 hands quite often, and the need as well for a lot of people to have to bend down and pick the cable up. And the aim for us was really to create something that was affordable and was low tech, that people could keep in their boots, so that they were able to become more self-reliant and have sort of that increased confidence of being able to get to a charge point and be confident that they would probably more than likely be able to charge. The cable reel idea has proved to work, and it's improved user experience, not just for people with disabilities, but for non-disabled users as well. So we're looking at a few more product iterations and trials to refine it further before hopefully taking it to market next year. I'm afraid I can't show you a picture because there's some IP issues around it at the moment, so it's still in the bag. Our other approach that we had was looking at the Chargepoint hardware itself, and with funding from Innovate UK and working with Dooku, who we partnered with on the Can Do project, we started from scratch, kind of really breaking down the user journey and experience and sort of challenging those design assumptions that people were making about the way that a charge point had to look, the way it had to work, what sort of that user experience was. and could we do it better? The result, we think, is Chargepoint that has it meets all of the BSI PAS guidance that's just come out. It has an innovative automated reel. It doesn't need barriers or pedestals, and it has a uniquely accessible user interface. And in fact, in a number of areas, it goes sort of above and beyond what the BSI proposals are, to really sort of improve everyone's user experience. We're about to start the second round of development of the Chargepoint, which is really exciting, working with a really fantastic group of partners with the goal of being ready for manufacture spring next year. And I think I noticed in the chat, somebody said, is there a universally designed Chargepoint that's available? This one has been universally designed, it's just not quite available yet. I think that the key to success for the projects that we've had, other than sort of the amazing funders that we've had who were open to sort of completely new and random ideas, has been ensuring that we have people with a variety of disabilities and backgrounds involved in every stage of the project, and really embedding that throughout each of the projects. And this is really kind of the best and only way to ensure that product design and development meets the needs of everybody. And I think that kind of really neatly leads me on to the question around equity, which obviously we're talking about today, and inclusivity, and the need to have those communities involved in the conversation. So it's not just sort of that collaboration and conversation between CPOs, planners, local authorities and government. It's including those communities in those conversations. I think I've rambled enough now, so I'll hand back to Dan.
I was looking forward to 20 minutes. Thank you very much for that, Claire. I'm just going to double check. We did have Susan Fulton from Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, but I don't think she's available today. Unfortunately, had to pull out at the last minute. So what I'll ask is, for our three previous speakers, if you could maybe turn your videos back on, and we'll start having a bit more of a exploratory discussion, I guess. Please hit us with your questions. I think Mark Constable has somewhat already anticipated one of my first questions, which was going to be around what is the largest challenge right now? He's suggesting it's always curbs, is sort of the number one challenge that we need to start dealing with. But I wonder if anyone else has any thoughts around, you know, what is the first thing that we need to start dealing with from an inclusivity perspective? Is there something that sort of boils to the surface and, you know, should be more important than anything else? I'm just going to go straight back to Claire. You're the last one talking.
You're both just itching to say something then.
I'm going to go first, Dan, just before I say something before Claire said. So yeah, for us, it's the biggest challenge is just starting to think about it. You know what I mean? Like you said earlier, we can't solve every problem for every site. So I think as long as we're starting to talk about it, we've got audits, we've worked with some local authorities to do it, and starting having that discussion and starting to at least think about it when we're installing new charge points, you're kind of halfway there, you know what I mean? So that's my take on the biggest challenge. Well, let Claire answer.
Yeah, I think for me it's and I just touched on that, it's including people from different communities and from different backgrounds. A lot of the people that do the design work, who do the manufacturing, who are responsible for the planning, they're all of a particular demographic. So you need to have that diversity of thought and diversity of background in those conversations to really understand what it is that people need. And I think I'd agree with Gary. It's getting those conversations early when you're starting to sort of strategically plan where your EV charge points are going. And I think it's also including the idea of equity and making sure that we're not heading towards a society that has sort of EV deserts in areas where actually EV charge points could bring the most benefits to certain communities.
Great. I don't know if Anna, Stefan, Dan, whether there was anything more specific. I'm gonna jump on Mark in a minute, but I just want to check in with the tech companies as to whether you'd sort of discovered anything on your journey so far that's worth bringing up.
I can go. I think sort of outside of the I guess the accessibility side of things, I think interoperability is one of the biggest biggest challenges that we face today. And I think in the UK we seem to have gone in a slightly different direction to what happened in mainland Europe, where sort of roaming and interoperability are just totally standard. We seem to have decided to try and have a few more kind of big vertically integrated companies that want to maintain a grasp on their empires. But I think, you know, we're going to get to a point where ideally there just needs to be a charger everywhere your car is going to be. You know, I don't know exactly the statistic, but I think it's something like most vehicles are only moving for 2% of the time. So that's 98% of the time that they could be charging in a very managed, slow way, if possible. And we've got a huge number of chargers going and being installed. So those numbers that you were posting about in Scotland, I think that's only public chargers. Is that right? But there'll be a huge amount of other chargers at sort of workplaces and domestic that in theory could all be opened up for things like charger sharing and providing workplaces with a faster return on investment by opening their chargers to the public in evenings and weekends and stuff like that. But I think just being able to think about charging infrastructure as being something slightly more than I've got an exact requirement, therefore I'm going to install 2 chargers, but actually thinking about it as becoming, you know, almost like a public service infrastructure is something that, you know, could be hugely beneficial to opening things up.
Great. Anna, Stefan, anything to add?
Yes, yeah, sorry, no, I started to talk before Dan, and it kind of took the scene, but I didn't realize I was on mute, so here I am now. Right, the challenges we faced actually were very different and spread it around the different actors of this process. So if you consider, first of all, the charge points infrastructure, this is the main problem. The main problem is not just the user facing, but the charge point operator as well, because with Mr. Robertson, Ryan from East Lothian, one of the things that he reported as a charge point operator is like, I definitely want my EV charge point to be as accessible as possible, but I need to go back to the designer of that charge point and tell him, like, what did you do? It's not easy for them to provide this amazing service as charge point operators when they don't have the right EV infrastructure. So the other actors to consider as well in this whole process would be also the designers of the charge points. And another thing we faced as, again, the charge points operator phase in terms of when we explore the reservation of charge points, for example, because the users want to know if the charge point is available. We offer that information through our travel plan map, and it's in there. But what happens from when the person plans the journey, that time frame that goes by from when I leave my location and I go to the destination, that charge point might not be available any longer. So there is a question, who is going to pay for the time that this charge point is reserved for? So let's say we want to offer that opportunity, and we were exploring somehow this with you at Fusion, Miralles, Dan, but also with ESB, which is the other partner who helped us to deliver the EV Assist project in England. It's you know, the charge point operator can't really leave for, I don't know, half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, the charge point free and stopping others from charging into it. So this is a question we had offered to the users some fares, like, oh, would you pay a little bit, like up to €7, £7, £10 to reserve it for half an hour? And there are sort of different reactions to that, because at the moment users can still charge for free. So we are presenting a product which is, when the demand is going to be super high for charge point, at the point where these people can actually charge for free at Tesco supermarket car park. And you know, it's one of those things that actually it's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves. And of course, availability of data. We would like to have access to the data of all the EV chargers of all the world, but let's start with the UK first. And that's still something very difficult, especially in terms of availability, but also reliability. So yeah, that was what I wanted to highlight mainly.
Great.
Yep.
No, and I think the whole discussion around what changes when all of a sudden we have to start paying for the use of all these charges becomes really, really interesting. Before we get to Mark, Stefan, I didn't know if you just wanted to add anything there quickly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the interoperability, not just on a technical level, but also, how do we integrate all stakeholders within that system and make them talk to each other and make that whole process more efficient is very important. And another point that's by far not the biggest issue, but within the remit of what we are solving with eVSOLT, is that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence at the moment about bay hogging and icing, but nobody is able to really quantify the problem. And if I think that impacts the measurability of any impact or any actions that you're actually taking going forward. So if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And therefore, we need to give people an insight what that problem is, quantify it, and by being able to really show hard numbers, we're also able to address questions around range anxiety and quantify how often is a charger actually blocked. Should that prevent somebody from buying an EV, or is that 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100, or 1 in 10? And I think that those kind of hard numbers are important to help us improve access to the whole network.
Absolutely, and I guess anything crowdsourced has questionable credibility to start with anyway, and I guess that's what we're working with right now. So Mark, I know you were dying to contribute a little bit here about guessing something from a design perspective, what to consider, what to think about, and what we should be looking at potentially.
Yeah, apologies. I need a whiteboard to explain. I can't work without whiteboards.
Okay.
So it's basically, I think, coming back to the question, which is, what is the biggest challenge? And having looked at this for a few years and worked with the world's fastest electric speedboat to people with disabilities and whatnot, it all comes down to, what is inclusivity with electric vehicles, because we've skipped past that and focused on a few and then glossed and kind of highlighted it very broadly. Now, when it comes to technology, what does the technology look like when it's self-sufficient and sustainable? We use percentiles quite a bit. So you tend to, if it's successful, you get a nice little bell curve where this is your self-sufficient profit-making part of the business, where it's really easy for them to kind of operate and work with. So you've got support going on the left, and you've got how many people are using on the right. People in the 5th percentile tend to get seen as the people with disabilities. That's not always the case. And then people on the right-hand side, 95% tend to be people with too much money and want something a bit more special. When it comes to electric vehicle, just in general electric vehicles, what you've got is this, where actually electric vehicles themselves aren't inclusive. And we're talking about building infrastructure that is also not inclusive. So when we were talking about it in the office the other day, the biggest challenge is actually how do you make this bell curve, where actually EVs are uptaken, and how do you build electric charging points or infrastructure to support that bell curve. And at the moment, having looked into it, and every universal design I've seen from, every sector of the UK and America, there's so many people trying to solve the same bloody problem, and all trying to do it in their own unique way with a bit of ego behind it. I have not yet seen a universal design for an electric vehicle charger that actually solves it for this people. It solves it really, really well for these guys. And it might have some opportunity over here, but actually most of it doesn't even gloss over that. So, look at the facts that 50% of people don't have off-street parking, right? You've got people being told not to go into the city centres. There's lots of other challenges that aren't being addressed by the infrastructure at the moment. So that, to me, is the biggest problem.
So I guess leading on from, that sort of brings up the whole chicken or the egg discussion is the lack of EV charging infrastructure what's actually limiting people, or partially what's limiting people buying the vehicles in the first place. Sorry, that's just a put that out there, not expecting really an answer from anyone, but there's obviously a lot more factors we need to be considering there. Don't know if anyone had a particular response to what Mark was pointing out.
Just on your
Dan,
point,
yep.
Dan, there's you know, it is a lack of EV charging infrastructure a blocker to people buying EVs. Like, to those people, they should be more scared, because there's probably more EV chargers per vehicle today than there ever will be again. So, you know, where you turn up at the moment to a row of, you know, 10 Tesla chargers at a service station or something, and there's one in use. Fast forward 5 years, you're going to be queuing up for half an hour, and we're already starting to see that in places like Scandinavia, where there's big queues for chargers. So it's just always interesting to hear that as a blocker today, when it's probably going to get much worse. But the sort of savior of that is the fact that through sort of systems and better management and a lot of the stuff that can come through, you know, the innovative projects that we're talking about today, that's how we can sort of move past those things and facilitate a better experience, even though the ratio of chargers to vehicles is likely to decrease.
I guess it's something not often people don't really think about. We've got an audience member who I think wants to contribute. Kate Tyrrell, I don't know if you're still there, but I'll see if I can allow you to talk. I haven't done this before, so it'll be a learning experience. And hear what you have to contribute to it. You should be able to talk to us now.
Hi. Thanks.
Hi, we can hear you. Yep.
So I've actually started a business in the last 7 months, which is looking at exactly the inclusivity piece on accessibility and safety. So for us, and my own personal experience from a safety element, it was more of, you know, how do the networks, what should the networks be focusing on, and how would they know how to improve upon these things? So we have come up with like a really thorough inspection program that we're planning to roll out on a nationwide scale and collect the data based on the safety and accessibility of the environment, nearby facilities, and functionality of the charge points. So it will be done completely independently of the Chargepoint network operators, and we will be selling the data back to the network operators if they want to make improvements or adjustments to their infrastructure. But what it enables them to do is, rather than throwing tons of money at you know, a blanket problem, they will know exactly what they need to improve upon to make their infrastructure more inclusive. And the accessibility piece is actually led by the piece. I know that Heidi's commented on this in the chat. So the PAS that OZEV and Motability have put together, we're currently being influenced quite heavily by that. And when that is fully published later on this year, that will be adjusted into our inspection, just to make sure that we're kind of giving advice in all the right places. And then those scores, so it will be a 5-star rating system, but those scores will then be handed over to the likes of ZapMap, Waze, WhatsApp, Electric Juice, you know, anyone who wants the score to display, so that drivers can make more informed decisions about where they're going to charge away from home.
Great. I'm wondering, is in your assessments that you're planning on doing, I mean, is it just about accessibility? You talked about the sort of broader environment. I mean, sorry, it's a bad example, but you get the idea. It's like, you know, is there a coffee shop nearby? Are you looking at the more superficial things that improve that whole charging experience, or is it narrower than that?
It's a bit more niche. So for me, the whole business idea came about as a result of being stranded on my way home in the dark at the back end of a very dark car park, which was, you know, set back from the road. There was no human activity. So it was more about, how do we make charging infrastructure safer for everyone? Because as a woman, I felt unsafe, but actually, if we make it safer for everyone by default, you know, the women feel safe, so will the men. And then on the accessibility piece, it is, you know, is the environment accessible? What with the PAS, you know, what's the height from the curb to the screen on the unit? What does the cable management systems look like? What is the ease of payment of the particular charge location? How bright is the lighting? Is there security cameras? Is there security staff on site? And with the facilities, that's more from a safety element. So, you know, if you're at a charger which is right near a 24/7 fast food chain, for example, those particular chargers might be deemed more safe because you're still within earshot of a staff member who is there 24/7. So if you needed to scream for help, someone would hear you. But if it was at a service station on the motorway and the chargers were really far back from the facilities, even out of sight, that would not be deemed a safe environment to be at that time in the morning to charge a vehicle.
Got it. Yeah, no, that sounds like a really interesting area that you're working on. I'm realizing that there's sort of two sides to this. There's sort of the foreground effort when you're talking about the design and designing new chargers, designing things in different ways. And then there's these sort of initiatives after the fact, evaluating what's already in place and communicating that information, which is, yeah, two very different approaches there, I guess. So I guess with regard, I mean, a number of the speakers talked about having to broaden the conversation and include a wider range of groups and whatnot. How do we do that? Is it just events like this? Is there other ways of, is there a silver bullet to that problem? Or is it just talking about it more and more, raising awareness? Claire.
You see me unmuting with like, shit, she's going to say something now, damn it. It's going into those communities. You know, looking at the screen at the moment, we're all from a particular demographic. I mean, there's at least some women on this call. 99% of the time I'm on calls and it's nearly all men. But it's about going into those communities. It's about talking to charities, about talking to different representatives from those communities and really understanding what it is that they want and need, not making assumptions. And I think that's sort of one of the things that we've sort of really learned from the projects we've been doing is you can't make assumptions. You have to go and ask people, and you have to work with people who have those different lived experiences and who have disabilities, because otherwise you're just not going to get a universal solution. And the fact is if you improve something for somebody with a disability, chances are it's going to improve usability for everybody. And you can't work on the basis of, oh, we're doing this as people for disabilities, and this is the people for people who aren't disabled, for sort of non-disabled people. We're one community, so we should be looking after everybody within that community as one. I'll get off my high horse now and let Anna.
Well, no, I was just going to, quick question, whose job is that?
I think it's everybody's responsibility, from Chargepoint manufacturers to software to government to local authorities. It's everybody has to be being involved in that, from the strategic planning of where the sites are, as Kate just touched on, to the nitty-gritty of each location. Like you said, is it near somewhere where I can go for shelter? Is it near some, you know, is there somewhere that somebody with a disability could rest? Is there a flat level surface leaving the charging hub? There's so many things to take into account that it's about embedding those conversations at every single level, sort of from the very, very start. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Anna?
Sorry, I was muted again. No, thank you very much. I just wanted to agree with you on all the points that you have just raised, because for me, the major insights I got for the both projects came from these communities, from these people we interviewed. Forget all the data, all the numbers and all of that boring stuff, which is not, you know, it's still useful, very useful, but it doesn't give you the insight you need. And I remember it amused me how someone absolutely, you know, with no disability would talk to another lady who has anxiety. She suffers for anxiety. She has this very strong anxiety, and it would be like, I don't have any range anxiety. I mean, I have Tesla charge points everywhere. And she's like, well, lucky you, I'm like struggling a lot. And sometimes I even avoid traveling because I can't really find out where I can find the right charge point for me. So it's very different when you were saying Exactly. It's you build something for people who don't have any specific need or requirements, and something else which is specific for disabled people. In reality, it should be the opposite. You should build all of them accessible, because then anyway, people who don't have any accessibility issues can access it anyway. But it was very interesting for me to see how different is their experience. We have someone who goes, he doesn't even care. He's like, I don't see even the point. Why would you want to reserve, for example, a charge point, or even knowing, yeah, maybe the availability, okay, but of it, but reserving it, it's, and the other lady would go, no, actually, it's what would really, really give me that reassurance that I'm going to travel, I'm going to find what I'm looking for, and it's available there for me when I need it. So it's important, just to reiterate your message of involving everyone and not leaving anyone outside from these communities. And it's everyone's responsibility, I would add as well.
So I'm going to reach out to one of our audience members just briefly, Mark Constable, just to ask him, is this important to manufacturers? Is it something that's always been something important, or just recently is the priority sort of becoming increased? Mark, you should be able to talk to us. Mark Constable.
Okay, can you hear?
Yep.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, right. Lovely. Thanks, Dan. No, I mean, I guess from a personal level, I've worked in the industry for about 10 years in infrastructure across, multiple segments. And I guess the time that it kind of really started to hit home is when I started thinking about rapid hubs for Transport for London. So that's only really kind of at the start of 2020. And so it's great that, the issue has kind of gained momentum. Someone very kindly, I think it was Heidi from OZEV, drew everyone's attention to the PAS 1899 consultation that's going on at the moment, and that's very timely. I guess, I guess just coming back on what one of the previous respondents said, the problem with it being everyone's responsibility is that will make it nobody's responsibility. And as manufacturers, we absolutely want to do the right thing. What we don't want to do is spend a load of R&D money creating something that subsequently turns out not to be suitable for the market. And so it's difficult for us to kind of lead that conversation. I mean, I think your host and panelist posting comment was aimed at me because I'd fudged my my early chat contributions. But we've done some Disability Rights UK consultation, and there is no one answer. One specific, we've got lighting on our charge points. Some types of visual impairment require the lighting to be really bright because their vision is effectively dim, and approaching opaque, and so a bright light is what's required. Some other kinds of visual impairment means that a bright kind of pin source means you get the J.J. Abrams lens flare, and your vision effectively wipes out in whatever color of that light particularly is. And so you can't adhere to both of those two requirements simultaneously. And I take on board the comment that the standards will come out, but the problem is the standards will not fix the problem for every single individual, and for a very small group of individuals they might make it worse. And so as manufacturers, we want to be, we want to try and get the best possible answer. But depending on where as a manufacturer your technology is used, I mean, we've got a very powerful solution, but it's in a really narrow niche. Some of those other requirements which are applied to the wider market might actually work against us in terms of accessibility. So it's not an easy thing for manufacturers to try and kind of work it through. I mean, just as an interesting kind of aside, there are about 193 local authorities in the UK. With Highways Authority. I've spoken to about 50 to 60 of them in the year that I've been working for Trojan. In a local authorities, aesthetics absolutely trumps every other consideration in charge point design. Not all of them, but certainly for an interesting number. So there is a cultural kind of shift that needs to kind of take place as well, just to get through, the planning and permitting and, acceptability test for schemes. So it's not just about a set of technical requirements, I think.
You can't be saying that you can't make something beautiful and useful at the same time.
No, you can make something beautiful and useful. What you can't do is if you've got a particularly grey environment and you want to add colour to your charge points, and the direction is the charge points must blend in to the local environment as much as possible, that works directly against visual acuity. It's challenges like that which are as manufacturers we will do whatever whoever's holding the purse strings want us to do. And that's kind of the bluntness of the message that I guess I'm trying to get across.
Got it. So you're trying to embrace standards, but also wary of them at the same time, because you're just not going to be able to comply with potentially what is put out there by the sound of it. Okay, I didn't know. Oh, there's a hand up. It's either Gary or Claire again. Go for it.
I think I just wanted to pick up on what Mark said there around you can't make something accessible for everybody. You just can't. There's always going to be somebody that it's not accessible for. But I think that doesn't mean that we stop trying to make things as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. There's a huge number of really simple solutions that you can put in place that are relatively inexpensive, relatively easy to do. It just takes forethought to do it when you're designing new sites. We've just worked with Dundee on their 4th hub. We were brought in sort of quite late in the process, so they had a fixed budget, they had a fixed site, and they had the constraints of a site that had to have overhead panels. Yet we've been able to work with them and SWACO to really improve the accessibility of that site. So it's about doing what you can within the constraints that you've got. And I think a lot of the things that you can do are really, really simple. It just takes some thought. It's about where you place that street furniture. It's about the materials that you use. It's about consistency of signage. Mark touched on lighting there, and yeah, there are different disabilities that are affected by different lighting, but then you can think about using an audio loop. There's lots of different ways of approaching different things. So it's not a black and white solution by any means, but there are lots of solutions out there that are relatively inexpensive. So
I just want to add as well that going back to Mark's point earlier on about the car manufacturers, I think we can't accept as an industry that what we did in the past in petrol stations and just accepting that's the way it will be is good enough. We've got the opportunity while new car manufacturers are coming to the market all the time. We've got the opportunity to do things differently. So I think as an industry, we've got to just not just use what we did before and try and make that slightly better. We've got a chance to do the whole thing better if we think about this and the whole process and start to finish and all the people that we've talked about being involved. It's difficult, but if we don't push it and don't have people pushing this agenda, we won't make that, like Mark talked about, that massive improvement in accessibility and inclusivity. And I think we've just got to keep pushing that agenda to everybody and not accept the norm.
Yeah, I think that's what Mark at 4C was saying, suggesting a little bit earlier as well, is take a step back and look at the broader issues and rethink how we approach this whole thing. Dan, got your hand up.
Yeah, and just to add in on the making solutions that are accessible to literally everybody, again, that's not possible. But what is possible is to make the information more accessible. So people don't. There's no sort of body or go-to place to go and get information about a charge point with this sort of information in it. And people use that map. It's probably the biggest used aggregation service at the moment. But the information in there is not adequate. It starts as crowdsourcing, but networks can put the data in themselves. But again, it's not necessarily in the network's interest at the moment to put in information that will potentially turn people away from their charge points, right? But I think that goes back to Kate's point and the sort of initiative that she's pushing, where you have some independent outside source of information that goes and provides this information in a neutral way. It sounds completely fantastic, and I think making that information as accessible as possible. Appreciate you need a business model for it as well, but like, getting that out there as much as possible seems like it'd be, hugely beneficial.
Great. So, okay, we've talked about, I guess, a lot of different challenges and things that we need to be done. I'm just wondering, and quite a few of the companies we've got talking today have received different types of funding to help with their innovations. What else is needed? Is there much in the way currently out there helping to support development in this current landscape, or what else is needed?
I'm going to say, Dan, the funding that comes through Transport Scotland is vital, because I think Dan touched on their business case. There's still the business case around EV charging. There's still a rush to get stuff in the ground, a rush to get land grabbing, a rush to get, deployment, build up your network. So there's still a rush from the early people to get enough chargers in the ground to make a business model, to make money. So it's without the kind of funding that's come through, it's very difficult to stop and think about this thing as a whole, because there is money to be made and people need to get return on investment, and that sometimes is a real challenge when you've built something and you deploy something that doesn't work for a number of people. People are happy to roll that out and out. So without these kind of projects standing alone and trying to come up with solutions and deploy them and test them in real life solutions and understand how do we take that to market, I think that funding that's come through is being vital to that, because that's we all work for businesses, and most of us, so that that there is that element to it as well, that we have to make money, and so that is a real challenge. And I think the funding supporting these right from feasibility through to deployment and to bringing it into manufacture is really, really important.
It sounds like you're saying two different things there, whereas I think the funding so far has been quite specific, like targeting a particular challenge. But you're saying the conversation or what needs to happen is at a higher level and kind of is a broader context. Is there a way we can incentivize that broader change and have companies maybe invest in developing their own solutions that match that need? Maybe that's standards.
I think so, and I think bringing disruptive technologies, what a lot of the people here work with, once you start doing that, then it almost becomes the norm, doesn't it? Once somebody brings out something that's a totally different standard and a higher quality and provides information or an experience that's better, then everybody else is forced to use that. But we need to bring those disruptive technologies to the market, and then I feel like the market then will follow.
Yep. As Kate just points out in the chat there, it's good to having these legacy sites because we can point at them and say, that's where we went wrong, and sort of deal with some of those particular challenges. Sorry, Mark, were you going to say something from 4C?
Yeah, I think the thing which I'm seeing is kind of I've made notes of all this stuff, but anyway, the thing that's kind of missing is a big picture vision. It's great that money's being handed out in terms of grants, but that to me is a bit like passing the buck. Someone else go and solve the problem, and then there's 100 companies all trying to solve the same problem, and we'll just pick the one that we kind of like, but actually we haven't made our mind up. There isn't that singular, well, this is how we're going to deal with sites that are these parts of Scotland. This is how we're going to deal with these parts of Scotland. This is how built up areas, rural areas, suburban areas. And to me, the biggest thing, a parallel to that is a bit like how different councils within Scotland all have different colour bins for recycling. You could very much end up in that same situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Luckily, we don't move very often, so you don't have to work out what bins are doing what. Thanks for that. I guess we've talked about these innovations and some of the challenges. I just wanted to we're running a few more minutes left. But what is the impact of not doing these things? One of the presentations earlier, actually, I think it was Gary's, talked about, there's potentially 20% of the market isn't even thinking about EVs. Is that the impact is that we're actually limiting the market and the uptake of EVs if we don't address this? Is it more nuanced than that? Is there any more detail anyone wants to add to that observation, or is it kind of that black and white?
Well, I was gonna say, sorry, Dan, I know I saw you put your hand. You can go first if you want, because you had your hand first, actually.
No, you go.
That's fine, thank you. No, I was just, two things I'm saying, I think they are pretty much connected, but I was completely ignoring, I project managed both EVSS projects, and I ignored completely what the manufacturer's challenges are. So we are sort of considering pieces of the cake. And as Mark just said, we don't have the full picture, because if Mark said this example of the visual impairments worked perfectly, spoke to a software development company saying, we have this problem as a manufacturer, maybe there are digital solutions that software developer can find for you to make that problem disappear. So we create this accessibility, not for everyone, but at least we solve one problem we thought we were not able to solve, because they are two very different side of the medal. So I do agree that more conversation involving all the actors are needed, because I was, for example, myself, completely distant from the challenges that designers or manufacturers face when they when they design the EVs. So something, and the impact, to just respond to what you said, Dan, is that you miss on solution when you don't involve anyone from start to bottom. So that was me, sorry.
And I guess that leads to a better product. Like your product could be better than it currently is, but you're just not considering all the options.
Absolutely.
Dan.
Yeah, so just to follow on from that as well, like, I think the other impact or the risk is just you leave certain demographics behind. If you leave this only to commercial forces, you're going to have your sort of big rapid networks that are going to go out and have like very sort of precise modeling around which, where they should put their chargers first. And you're going to have, rural villages in Cumbria where, we're installing chargers with networks like Charge My Street. There's only sort of 50 houses in a village, but there's 5 people in that village who are looking at getting an EV in the next 6 months. Someone like Instavolt isn't going to go, yeah, brilliant, let's chuck 100 grand at sticking a couple of chargers in the middle of the village square. Whereas, when you look at some of the alternatives and some of the niches, I guess, you're able to go and explore those more interesting use cases that prevent people from being left behind. And I think just back to the point around, Mark, that you just made around the sort of funding and that being potentially, passing the buck a little bit. I think, I do think that innovation funding is a fantastic thing, and I would say that, having working for a company where we've sort of been through that process. But I think what there often needs to be afterwards is that sort of bridge between, we did something really fun and innovative and cool, and it's transformational for an industry, but now we need to not just take it to market, but really make it part of the mainstream offering. And I think actually Scotland is uniquely positioned to be able to do that in the EV industry at the moment, because it has its own national network. And I think that's something that could be leveraged to a much greater degree to be able to go and sort of utilize some of the innovations that are happening, not just treating it as another commercial network, but actually using it as like a hub to go and push some of these things out. If we're thinking about like different standards and stuff like that, that might in the future be considered legislatively, but actually, Scotland could lead the way in that and say, do you know what, as part of the Charge Place Scotland, we're going to mandate that all our charge points installed in the future adhere to this standard or something like that. So I think there's, there is a unique opportunity for Scotland to be able to lead the way on some of those things.
So it kind of sets the bar when it comes to other deployments, then I guess it's sort of a peer effect potentially there. I mean, if you want people to use your equipment, then you kind of need to compete with what potentially could be Charge Place Scotland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Gary, your hands up, or is it Claire?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Dan just said there, really around with no interventions, charge point operators are tending to focus on areas of higher EV uptake, which is the wealthier areas. And there's a lot of research coming out of America now. Harvard's done a lot of research, and a lot of the big cities like Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh and Seattle have started to find that there's kind of real deserts where there are no charge points. And there's now sort of the impact of that is starting to come through, where you have drivers who are being deterred from going into those areas because they can't charge while they're there. So delivery drivers, taxi drivers. You also have the people that are there that could really benefit economically from making the switch to EV. Again, the taxi drivers and the delivery drivers who can't charge. So it's making sure that people have got the access to those charge points. But again, it's also that question around the motor manufacturers. So a lot of the kind of the evidence that's coming out now is that the motor manufacturers are targeting higher income buyers. There's an increased prevalence of really big SUV EVs, and they're just forgetting about that second-hand market. They're forgetting about how those EVs need to filter through to different communities. So it's picking up on what Dan just said, is that equity question, and how we make sure at different levels that everybody has access to EVs and EV charge points. And the different models around car clubs, it doesn't have to be ownership. The car ownership model is a really, really old model. Can it be car clubs? Could it be electric bikes? How's it going to work? What does it look like? So it's that kind of wider strategic thinking as well.
That's really, really interesting. That kind of leads into the difference between the accessibility and inclusivity, especially with sort of last mile logistics and the push of these fleets being driven towards electrification, especially in somewhere like Scotland with its rural and remote locations. Does that disadvantage just getting my Amazon delivery even further? I mean, often you're paying more to get something delivered in the Highlands, but does that get worse when we've got the government pushing towards electrification, which starts limiting things somewhat there? I didn't know, we might just do a quick whip around. We're now running low on time, but any concluding remarks from any of our speakers? Maybe start with Claire and Gary. Any takeaways that you want to share?
Not really, just always good to speak about this, and the more people speaking about it, the better, I think. Like from every sector, that's all. We've still got a lot to learn, we've got a lot to do. Nobody knows all the answers. So yeah, these events and these conversations are brilliant, and just want to keep working in this area. So
great. Dan, Lucy, Lloyd?
Yeah, just the importance of keeping the conversation going, and spreading it as wide as we can. The events like this are likely to attract people who are within the EV industry. But, we need to make sure that we're engaging people who might still be in, positions of important decision-making within different organizations, but won't have even started thinking about any of this stuff yet.
Yep. Mark at 4C?
Well, I've got 5 predictions, I suppose.
Tell us all about it.
Which we should be writing down, and I'm aware this is not going to make friends. But if I like to think about 2 things in terms of what if they're successful, what does it actually mean, and that would help pivot what the business opportunity is. So if it's successful, which it will be, because it kind of has to be, what will the likes of Google and Apple do? So, they already know people's travel plans. They know roads that become busy. They know, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if they already know where all the charge points are. What is stopping them from buying up one of 100 startups that are all trying to solve the same problem and embedding it? Because that user experience is probably better than having another app. There's already statistics about how many apps people actually use. So that's one statistic, one future thought. If we buy enough electric vehicles by 2030, will bay hogging even be a problem? If you've got so many charge points, I kind of see it as a bit like, there's not enough parking spaces in the car park being an issue. So how do you work around that? The EV take-up will pivot around off-street parking solutions. But I see that being the biggest opportunity for people to work and solve. And I think there has to be some form of reason why people consent to having EV charging capabilities outside their home. There are companies like Ringo, which are perfectly positioned to become massive players in this field. You know, I can go from anywhere in Glasgow to Yorkshire and park my car and not have to worry about, do I have change? Now, they operate in nearly every public access road in Glasgow. I don't know about the rest of Scotland. They're in a great position. And if I was a person working on some tech, I'd probably try and sell my business to them. And probably that other countries, if it's like everything else that we seem to be doing in Scotland, I see other countries beating us to the punch, and we won't be the leaders, and we'll end up buying up what other people solve. So I think there is an opportunity over the next 5 years to kind of really crack this out. It's not just about having people, the right people in the room. It's about having a consistent leadership. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Anna Di Donato.
Right. Well, whatever they have just said, it's just exactly what I want to say. It's increasing the number of conversations like this, involving more actors of the process, and doing that consistently mainly. So yeah, that's what I think.
Great. Stefan, you've been quiet. Now's your opportunity.
No, it's been perfect to network on this topic and to learn about the challenges that everybody is facing and how they're tackling it. And generally, the discussion really just helps to align our understanding as well, to learn from others, and maybe position us slightly different or more balanced on certain aspects. So that's been great. Thank you.
Good. Caitlin, I don't know if you want to say anything. Let's finish off with Transport Scotland.
Sure, I was just going to thank everyone for coming along to this event today. It has been really, really interesting to hear all the networking, everyone's insights, the feedback, and what's the opportunities, what still needs to be done, which is quite a bit of work, but I think it'll be good to continue collaborating with you all, because it is really important for every player to be involved in the innovation and the development of accessible and inclusive charging network across Scotland. So yeah, thank you.